Look closely at these masterpieces from history, the vibrant frescoes, the intricate tapestries, the stunning canvases that have defined our understanding of art and culture for centuries. But now, let your eyes drift away from the familiar scenes of battles, portraits, and landscapes. Look up into the skies these artists painted. There, hidden in plain sight, are forms that defy explanation. Strange flying objects, shimmering discs, and mysterious lights that simply don't belong to the world as we know it. What if these aren't just artistic flourishes or symbolic motifs? What if they are evidence, silent testimonies left by our ancestors of encounters with the unknown? This is the compelling question that has puzzled historians, art experts, and UFO enthusiasts alike. Across cultures and centuries, from Renaissance Italy to ancient Japan, from medieval manuscripts to prehistoric cave art, artists have repeatedly depicted aerial phenomena that challenge our conventional understanding of history. Did our ancestors witness UFOs? Were they trying to document something extraordinary, something beyond their comprehension, using the only tools they had, paint and brush? In this video, we embark on an extraordinary journey through 25 ancient artworks from around the globe, each one telling a story not just of its time, but perhaps of something far more mysterious. We will travel across continents and through millennia, exploring paintings that capture strange craft in the sky, celestial beings inside fiery wheels, and inexplicable objects that look hauntingly similar to what many report seeing today. This isn't just an art history lesson, it's a detective story, a quest for answers hidden in the brushstrokes of the past. The tone here is one of open-minded curiosity. We're not starting with conclusions, but with wonder. We'll examine each piece with a careful eye, considering the context, the artist's intent, and the cultural beliefs of the era, while also daring to ask the bigger questions. You'll see familiar works in an entirely new light and discover obscure pieces that are equally astonishing. This exploration is for everyone who has ever looked at the night sky and wondered what might be out there, and for anyone who believes that history still holds secrets waiting to be uncovered. So settle in, keep an open mind, and join us as we decode the mysteries left behind on canvas, peeling back the layers of time to reveal the possibility that we have never been alone. Our journey begins not in a gallery, but within the hallowed stone walls of a 14th century Serbian Orthodox monastery. High in the mountains of Kosovo, the Visoki Deconi Monastery houses one of the most extensive and well-preserved collections of medieval frescoes in the Balkans. Among these breathtaking biblical scenes is a depiction of the Crucifixion of Christ, painted around the year 1350. At first glance, it appears as a traditional, albeit powerful, rendering of this pivotal Christian moment. But look closer, just over the shoulders of the mourners and soldiers gathered at Golgotha. Flanking Jesus on the cross, set against a golden sky, are two unmistakable objects. These are not angels with feathery wings, nor are they stylized clouds or symbolic suns. These are intricate, mechanical-looking crafts, each occupied by a single figure intently operating a set of controls. The crafts themselves are fascinating in their detail. They possess a certain aerodynamic shape with a central dome or canopy, and what appear to be propulsion elements, exhaust ports, or perhaps fins at the rear. Inside each one, a figure is clearly visible, one hand gripping a lever or a handle, the other sometimes raised as if in a gesture. Their postures are not of serene observation, but of active piloting. They are maneuvering these vehicles, which are angled as if they have just arrived on the scene or are preparing to depart. The artists of the Deconi Monastery were masters of their craft, painting with immense precision to convey spiritual narratives. Every element in a fresco like this was deliberate, meant to instruct the faithful. So what, then, are these objects meant to represent? Traditional art historians often classify these figures as personifications of the sun and the moon, a common symbolic motif in crucifixion iconography meant to signify the cosmic significance of Christ's death. Yet the depiction is strikingly literal and mechanical compared to the usual stylized faces or simple discs found in other works from the same period. This divergence from the norm is what fuels alternative interpretations. Could the artists have been depicting something they or their patrons had actually witnessed or heard described in accounts that filtered through trade routes? The 14th century was a time of great cultural exchange, and stories of strange sights in the sky could have easily been woven into the fabric of local legend, later interpreted through a religious lens. Another compelling perspective considers the possibility that the monks were not depicting extraterrestrial craft, but rather a mystical vision. In certain apocryphal Christian texts and mystic traditions, divine beings are described as residing within celestial chariots or fiery wheels, the Ophanim and Merkaba of Ezekiel's vision being a prime example. Perhaps the painter at Decoding was attempting to visualize such a complex theological concept, translating the description of a heavenly vehicle into the most advanced technological terms available to a medieval mind, a piloted ship. This interpretation bridges the gap between pure symbolism and a literal unidentified flying object, suggesting the artists were representing a spiritual reality as they understood it. The mystery of the Decoding fresco lies in this very ambiguity. It challenges us to move beyond a single, comfortable explanation and to appreciate the profound and puzzling creativity of our ancestors. Leaving behind the medieval mysticism of the Decoding monastery, we now travel to the heart of the Italian Renaissance, to a work of breathtaking beauty and intricate detail that presents a different kind of aerial mystery. Carlo Crivelli's The Annunciation with Saint Emilius, painted in 1486, is a masterpiece of perspective and religious devotion, commissioned to celebrate the granting of self-governance to the town of Ascoli. The scene is set within an idealized Italian cityscape, with meticulously rendered architecture leading the eye toward the central event, the moment the Archangel Gabriel informs the Virgin Mary that she will bear the Son of God. But it is the sky above this serene urban setting that captures our attention and ignites the modern imagination. Hovering majestically amongst the carefully drawn clouds is a singular, extraordinary object. It is not a winged angel or a simple burst of heavenly light. Instead, it is a complex, disc-shaped formation, composed of what appears to be swirling, golden clouds arranged in a perfect circle. From the very center of this luminous disk, a single, solid beam of light, a precise, laser-like ray descends at a sharp angle, striking the Virgin Mary directly on her forehead. Within this beam, following the traditional iconography of the Annunciation, flies a tiny dove representing the Holy Spirit. The official interpretation is clear and theologically sound. This is the moment of divine conception, with the Holy Spirit, symbolized by the dove, being sent from heaven to impregnate Mary. The golden cloud is thus understood as a manifestation of divine glory, a gateway from the heavenly realm. Yet, to a contemporary viewer, the visual presentation is strikingly anomalous. The source of the beam is not an abstract, ethereal glow, but a structured, circular object that possesses a distinct, almost technological solidity within its cloud-like composition. It doesn't simply shine with diffuse light, it emits a focused, direct energy beam targeting a specific individual. This compelling imagery has led many to propose an alternative, if controversial, reading that Crivelli, perhaps unintentionally, depicted a UFO encounter. In this view, the swirling golden disk is not a symbolic representation of heaven, but a craft. The beam of light is not a spiritual metaphor, but a literal, physical phenomenon, perhaps some form of advanced technology used for a genetic or spiritual transfer. The dove inside the beam could then be seen as the artist's attempt to contextualize an inexplicable event within the familiar framework of his faith, blending observation with doctrine. This interpretation is further fueled by the painting's own context. It was created for the Church of the Santissima Annunziata, which translates to the Holy Annunciation in Ascoli, a commission that demanded absolute orthodoxy. Crivelli was a skilled and respected artist who would not have deviated from accepted religious symbolism without a compelling reason. So did he simply design an exceptionally elaborate and unique cloud form to represent divine intervention? Or is it possible that he, or the patrons who commissioned the work, were influenced by local legends or even personal accounts of unusual aerial phenomena? The focused nature of the beam, so different from the soft, enveloping light typically seen in religious art, continues to be the core of the mystery. It challenges us to consider where divine inspiration ends and a record of the unexplained begins, all within the frame of one of the Renaissance's most precise and celebrated paintings. From the structured cityscape of Crivelli's Renaissance Italy, we find ourselves in another sacred scene, but this time the mystery unfolds not from a beam of divine light, but from a quiet, almost casual moment of observation. Hanging in Florence's Palazzo Vecchio, a painting attributed to the 15th century workshop of Filippo Lippi, known as the Madonna with Saint Giovannino, presents a familiar devotional image. The Virgin Mary is serene, her gaze downcast, with the infant Jesus and the young Saint John the Baptist at the center of the composition. It is a beautiful, conventional piece until you allow your eyes to wander to the upper right-hand corner. There, floating behind Mary's shoulder, is a peculiar, disc-shaped object, painted with a textured surface and emanating short, sharp beams of light, as if it were glowing or shimmering with intense energy. But the detail that truly makes this painting a cornerstone of this mystery is not just the object itself, but the reaction of the figures on the ground. Just below the hovering disc, a man stands, one hand raised to his brow, clearly shielding his eyes from a bright source of light above him. His posture is not one of prayer or reverence, but of practical, physical reaction. The universal gesture of someone trying to get a better look at something overwhelmingly luminous in the sky. Beside him, a dog looks upward, seemingly agitated or barking at the very same phenomenon. This is not a symbolic, stylized sun or moon. This is a recorded interaction between witnesses and an unexplained aerial presence. The object is rendered with a tangible solidity, and the response of the man and his dog grounds the event in a moment of witnessed reality, making it one of the most compelling and human depictions in our entire collection. So, what exactly are we looking at? The traditional art historical interpretation suggests this could be a representation of the angel of the Lord, often depicted in biblical narratives as a luminous divine presence. In this reading, the man is a shepherd, a common figure in nativity scenes, witnessing a heavenly manifestation. The radiating light would then symbolize God's glory, and the shepherd's shielded eyes would signify his unworthiness to gaze directly upon a holy being. This is a perfectly valid explanation that fits the religious context of the artwork. However, the visual evidence gives many pause. The object lacks any anthropomorphic features. There is no angelic figure within it, no wings, no human form. It is a simple, hard-edged disc, and its depiction, coupled with the very earthly, non-devotional reaction of the witness, feels strikingly different from typical Renaissance portrayals of divine angels, which are almost always humanoid and majestic. This discrepancy opens the door to other fascinating possibilities. Could the artist have been documenting a celestial phenomenon, such as a particularly bright comet or a rare atmospheric event like a parhelion or sun-dog? People of the 15th century would have interpreted such events through their own worldview, possibly seeing them as omens or divine signs. An artist aiming for realism might have painted exactly what he saw in the sky, which was later interpreted by viewers as a religious symbol. The most provocative theory, of course, is that this is a genuine depiction of an unidentified flying object, a craft of unknown origin witnessed by the painter or by people in the local area. The radiating light, the solid appearance, and most importantly, the clear, reactive behavior of the man and the dog, all combine to create a scene that feels less like a spiritual allegory and more like a report. The man isn't kneeling in awe, he is investigating, his body language suggesting curiosity and the physical need to protect his eyes from a powerful, real light source. The enduring power of this painting lies in its beautiful ambiguity. It sits at the perfect intersection of faith, art, and the potential for a documented anomaly. We are left to wonder if the painter intentionally blended a common religious theme with a rare natural event, or if he unknowingly preserved a moment of high strangeness for future generations to ponder. It reminds us that our ancestors looked at the same skies we do, and when they saw something they could not explain, they turned to the tools they knew best, in this case, a paintbrush, to make a record of it, leaving us a silent yet profoundly eloquent question mark hanging in the air over Florence. While the Italian masters were embedding mysteries into their iconic scenes of Annunciation and devotion, a different kind of spiritual revelation was taking shape in the Netherlands a few centuries later, courtesy of an artist who dared to reimagine one of the Bible's most sacred events. Aert de Gelder, a pupil of the legendary Rembrandt van Rijn, painted The Baptism of Christ in 1710, and it stands as one of the most strikingly unusual interpretations of this moment ever committed to canvas. The scene is set along the River Jordan, with a humble and resigned Jesus standing in the water as John the Baptist performs the rite. The figures are rendered with the deep, dramatic chiaroscuro and humanistic empathy that de Gelder learned in Rembrandt's studio. But overhead, the heavens do not simply part to reveal the voice of God or the descending dove of the Holy Spirit in a conventional way. Instead, a massive, golden, disc-shaped object dominates the sky, from which four distinct, powerful beams of light shine down, illuminating both Jesus and John in a radiant, otherworldly glow. De Gelder was not just any artist, he was one of Rembrandt's last and most devoted students, and he embraced his master's preference for emotional depth and naturalistic humanity over idealized, formalistic grandeur. This connection is crucial to understanding the painting. Rembrandt encouraged his students to seek personal and intimate interpretations of biblical stories to make them feel immediate and real. De Gelder took this advice to heart, and his entire body of work is known for its imaginative and sometimes unconventional religious scenes. So, when he envisioned the divine intervention at the baptism, he did not paint a stylized sun or a vague, ethereal cloud. He painted a structured, tangible object that commands the composition with its sheer presence. This was a deliberate artistic choice by a skilled and theologically knowledgeable painter, not an act of whimsy. The most compelling explanation for this unique vision lies in the Old Testament. Many scholars propose that de Gelder was directly inspired by the dramatic and complex vision of the prophet Ezekiel, who described a heavenly chariot as a wheel within a wheel, full of eyes and surrounded by fire and brilliant light. This mysterious Merkaba, or throne chariot of God, has fascinated mystics and theologians for millennia. De Gelder, in his quest to visualize divine glory, may have sought to represent this very vehicle, the ultimate source of divine power and authority, descending to bear witness to the baptism of Christ. In this interpretation, the disk is a symbolic representation of God's throne, and the beams of light are the tangible manifestation of his approval, as stated in the Gospels. "This is my Son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased." Yet for modern eyes, the resemblance to contemporary descriptions of UFOs is simply too pronounced to ignore. The object is a classic disc shape, and the beams are targeted and specific, reminiscent of searchlights or energy projections. This visual similarity forces a fascinating question. Did Aert de Gelder, in his attempt to render a biblical mystery, accidentally create an image that aligns perfectly with modern phenomena? Or, more provocatively, could the ancient descriptions that inspired him, like Ezekiel's wheels themselves, have been attempts to describe advanced technological crafts witnessed by people of those times? The painting becomes a powerful nexus point where faith, art history, and the possibility of the unknown collide. It suggests that the language used to describe the divine and the language used to describe the unexplained may sometimes be one and the same, separated only by the cultural and technological lens of the era. De Gelder's masterpiece challenges us to see biblical wonders not just as metaphors, but as potential records of profound, reality-altering events, forever captured in the bold and visionary brushstrokes of a Rembrandt pupil who was unafraid to look heavenward and paint exactly what he imagined. As we journey north from the sun-drenched Renaissance of Italy and the Netherlands, our exploration of celestial mysteries leads us high into the Austrian Alps, to a place of profound pilgrimage and artistic splendor. The Mariazell Basilica, founded in the 12th century, has long been the most important Marian shrine in Austria, a beacon for the faithful for hundreds of years. Within its sacred walls, a grand series of frescoes titled "The Life of the Virgin" was painted onto the dome between 1465 and 1466, depicting the key moments of the Virgin Mary's existence in vibrant narrative detail. These works were created in a time when art served as the Bible for the illiterate, every brushstroke intended to convey theological truths and inspire devotion. Yet within this deeply conventional religious cycle, there is a panel that presents a sight so unconventional it seems to break from the script entirely. In one specific scene, amidst the traditional depictions of annunciations and visitations, the artist chose to paint a vast, expansive sky above the landscape. And there, soaring silently through the clouds, is a long, cylindrical, cigar-shaped object. It is rendered with a stark simplicity that makes it stand out against the more ornate and symbolic elements of the surrounding fresco. This is not a host of cherubs, not a radiant sunburst, nor a dove representing the Holy Spirit. It possesses no wings, no halo, no discernible divine or human features whatsoever. It is simply a solid, dark, elongated form, moving with a purpose and direction that feels entirely separate from the sacred story unfolding on the ground below. Its shape is aerodynamic and singular, lacking any of the decorative flourishes or symbolic attributes that artists of this period would almost universally employ when depicting anything from the heavens. To understand why this image is so puzzling, we must consider the context of 15th century Austrian religious art. Artists working on such a prestigious commission for a major basilica were not free to insert random or fanciful elements. Every component of a fresco like this was deliberate, approved, and rich with meaning intended to be understood by the contemporary viewer. So what established iconographical tradition could this cigar-shaped object possibly belong to? The most common celestial symbols, the sun, the moon, a star, are always clearly defined as such. A comet might be depicted as a star with a tail, but this object is solid and substantial, more akin to a projectile or a vessel than a celestial body. One theory suggests it could be a poorly rendered or stylized Holy Spirit dove, but its form is so drastically different from the graceful, bird-like doves found in countless other artworks of the era that this explanation feels strained. This leaves us with a compelling gap in our understanding, a void that speculation naturally rushes to fill. Could the artist have witnessed an unusual atmospheric phenomenon, such as a particularly defined and persistent cloud formation, and incorporated it as a realistic element of the sky? Or was he documenting something more anomalous? The object's distinct tubular shape is eerily reminiscent of a specific class of UFO sighting commonly reported in the modern era, the cigar-shaped mothership. This parallel is impossible to ignore and raises profound questions about the nature of such sightings across time. Perhaps the most fascinating possibility is that the painter, bound by the strict conventions of his religious subject matter, had no framework to explain a strange object he or others had seen in the sky. Without the context of angels or divine symbols to assign to it, he may have simply painted it exactly as it appeared, an unidentified flying object, leaving it to float, enigmatic and unexplained, in the background of a holy narrative. It stands as a silent, secular mystery embedded within a sacred space, a stark reminder that the skies of the 15th century may have held just as many secrets as our own. From the quiet observation of a shepherd in Florence and the dramatic baptismal light of a Dutch master, we arrive at a scene of public spectacle and divine intervention in the heart of ancient Rome. Marcellino da Panicale's early Renaissance fresco, The Miracle of the Snow, painted around 1428, depicts the legendary event that led to the founding of one of Rome's most majestic basilicas, Santa Maria Maggiore. The story, as told for centuries, is a beautiful tale of faith. In the heat of a summer night in the year 358, the Virgin Mary appeared in a dream to Pope Liberius and a wealthy Roman patrician, instructing them to build a church in her honor on a site she would miraculously mark. The following morning, on the 5th of August, the Esquiline Hill was found blanketed in pristine, inexplicable summer snow. The painting captures this pivotal moment, with Pope Liberius tracing the outline of the future church in the miraculous snowfall, surrounded by a crowd of astonished Roman citizens. But as we have learned to do, we must look beyond the figures on the ground and direct our gaze upward to the sky from which this miracle descends. And here, the scene becomes truly fascinating. The heavens are not simply overcast or shedding gentle, natural snowflakes. They are filled with a formation of strange, distinct objects. These are not the soft, fluffy cumulus clouds of a typical Italian summer sky. Instead, Marcellino painted a series of what appear to be smooth, solid, lenticular forms, shapes that are eerily uniform, with defined edges and a consistent disc-like appearance. They are arranged in a deliberate pattern, almost like a fleet, and from their undersides the miraculous snowfall is emanating. To the faithful of the 15th century, these were undoubtedly the clouds through which God and the Virgin Mary worked their wonders, the vessels delivering the supernatural snow. Yet, to our modern eyes, trained by decades of ufology and atmospheric science, these forms bear a startling resemblance to something else entirely: lenticular clouds. These are unique, lens-shaped clouds that form at high altitudes, often in aligned, stacked formations, and are renowned for their smooth, saucer-like appearance and stationary presence even in high winds. They are a natural, if rare, meteorological phenomenon. This presents us with a captivating possibility. Could the miracle of the snow have been a case of mistaken identity? Imagine the citizens of 4th century Rome waking up to see a formation of strange, unmoving, disc-shaped clouds hovering over the Esquiline Hill with a light snow or frost, perhaps from an unusual temperature inversion, dusting the ground beneath them. In an age without scientific explanations for such a sight, the interpretation would have been immediate and profound, a divine sign. The event was so powerful it became foundational to one of Rome's great churches. This interpretation, however, opens the door to an even more intriguing alternative. What if Marcellino, in his attempt to paint the miracle, was not depicting stylized clouds at all, but was working from a description of the event that emphasized the unnatural nature of the objects in the sky? What if the original witnesses saw something that was not a cloud, but a fleet of unusual aerial phenomena? The uniformity and solidity of the objects in the fresco, so different from the wispy, amorphous clouds typically painted by Renaissance artists, lend a certain weight to this idea. Perhaps the legend of the snowfall was a narrative constructed to make sense of a truly inexplicable event, the appearance of a silent, coordinated group of unidentified objects in the Roman sky. The snow itself could have been a later embellishment, or perhaps even a side effect of whatever technology these objects possessed. Marcellino, bound by the church's official story, would have had no choice but to paint the event as a miracle, but his depiction of the celestial source retains a puzzling, concrete quality that continues to spark debate. This beautiful fresco, therefore, stands at a crossroads of faith, natural science, and the unexplained, reminding us that the stories we tell about our past are often layered, and that the truth can sometimes be hidden just beneath the surface of the paint. Shifting our focus from the painted frescoes and canvases of churches and palaces, we arrive at a different kind of masterpiece, one woven with thread instead of brushed with pigment, yet no less enigmatic. The tapestry of the Summer's Triumph, sometimes referred to as the Saluzzo tapestry, is a stunning example of 14th century textile art, created in a style reminiscent of the famous Bayeux tapestry. It depicts a vibrant, bustling medieval procession, likely celebrating a military victory or a noble wedding, with knights on horseback, heralds blowing trumpets, and citizens cheering in the streets. It is a magnificent snapshot of medieval pageantry, a linear narrative frozen in time. But as our eyes scan the rich, detailed tableau, they are drawn upward above the heads of the celebrating crowd, to a sequence of objects that seem to defy the earthly nature of the scene. There, floating serenely in the sky, are several perfectly round, disc-like forms, each adorned with a distinctive, cross-shaped pattern. The mainstream and most widely accepted explanation from art historians is both practical and symbolic. They propose these objects are écus, or decorative heraldic shields, suspended in the air as a symbolic representation of the knightly virtue and martial glory of the event being celebrated. In medieval art, it was not uncommon to use such symbolic shorthand, placing coats of arms or other emblematic devices in the background to convey abstract concepts like honor, protection, or divine favor. The cross pattern on each disc strongly supports this, as it mirrors the design found on the shields carried by the knights below, tying the celestial display directly to the chivalric themes of the tapestry. In this reading, the weavers were not documenting a sighting. They were employing a conventional artistic language familiar to their contemporary audience. However, this conventional explanation begins to fray when we examine the specifics of the depiction. If these are indeed ceremonial shields, why are they rendered with such perfect, uniform roundness, unlike the more common kite-shaped or heater-shaped shields of the period seen elsewhere in the tapestry? Their placement is also curious. They are not being carried or displayed on poles by people in the crowd, but are positioned independently in the sky, separated from the human figures by a clear gap, giving them a sense of autonomous presence. This visual disconnect prompts the compelling, alternative theory that the weavers incorporated something they had actually witnessed. Imagine the scene. A grand procession is underway, and suddenly, a formation of strange, silvery, disc-shaped objects appears overhead, moving slowly or hovering. The witnesses, having no framework for advanced aircraft or extraterrestrial visitors, would naturally interpret these objects through their own cultural lens. The most logical analogy would be the shields of celestial warriors, the armor of angels or divine beings. The weavers, tasked with recording the event, might then have seamlessly integrated these mysterious, heavenly shields into the tapestry, their true nature obscured by the symbolic interpretation of the time. This tapestry, therefore, presents us with a perfect allegory for the entire challenge of investigating ancient aerial mysteries. The line between documented reality and cultural symbolism is incredibly fine. Was the artist representing an idea, or were they representing an event, filtering an inexplicable phenomenon through the only vocabulary they possessed? The objects are there, clear as day, woven into the very fabric of history. Their official identity as shields is perfectly reasonable, yet their presentation leaves just enough room for a profound and tantalizing doubt. They serve as a powerful reminder that our ancestors lived in a world they believed was filled with divine signs and celestial portents, and when something unknown appeared in their skies, they recorded it not as a UFO, but as a shield of God, leaving us to unravel the true meaning behind the threads. As we move from the world of tapestries and public miracles into the sacred heart of a 17th century Italian church, we encounter perhaps the most visually startling anachronism in our entire collection. In the quiet town of Montalcino, within the Church of San Pietro, hangs an altarpiece painted by Bonaventura Salimbeni in the year 1600, titled The Glorification of the Eucharist. It depicts God the Father and Jesus Christ flanking a central object that, at first glance, seems to have fallen out of time. Suspended between the two divine figures is a highly detailed, metallic-looking sphere, bristling with what appear to be fins, handles, and two prominent antennae. To any modern viewer, the resemblance is immediate and uncanny. It looks almost exactly like Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, launched by the Soviet Union in 1957, over 350 years after this painting was completed. The official and orthodox interpretation of this object is deeply rooted in the theological and philosophical context of the Counter-Reformation, the period in which Salimbeni was working. Art historians and theologians identify it as the Sphera Mundi, or the world sphere. This was a common symbolic device in Renaissance and Baroque art, representing the entire cosmos, the created universe over which God holds dominion. In this specific painting, which glorifies the Eucharist, the central sacrament of the Catholic faith, the sphere takes on added meaning. It symbolizes the world that Christ redeemed through his sacrifice, a sacrifice represented in every Mass. The fins or protrusions could be interpreted as stylistic representations of the celestial meridians or the orbits of the planets, while the antennae might be seen as scepters or divine rods of authority, signifying God's rule over creation. This explanation is not only plausible but is the most logical within the painting's religious framework. Salimbeni was creating a piece of devotional art for a church, and every element was designed to convey a complex theological truth to the congregation. However, this established interpretation does not entirely resolve the sense of visual dissonance the object creates. The problem lies in its execution. Other artists depicted the Sphera Mundi as a beautiful crystalline orb, often banded with classical zodiac signs or swirling, ethereal clouds. Salimbeni's version is different. It is mechanical. It has a gritty, textured surface that suggests polished metal rather than translucent crystal. Its features are not flowing and symbolic but precise and structural. The protrusions are symmetrical and angular, resembling the radiator fins or thrusters on a piece of machinery. The two long, thin rods extending from the top are not ornate scepters. They are straight, functional, and undeniably antenna-like. This is not the soft, mystical cosmos of traditional iconography. It is an object that appears engineered. This leads us to the core of the mystery. Why would a devout artist in the year 1600 render a symbolic representation of God's creation to look so strikingly like a piece of advanced technology? One compelling theory is that Salimbeni was influenced by the scientific revolution quietly brewing in his own time. Although Galileo would not point his telescope at the heavens for another 9 years, the seeds of a new, mechanistic view of the universe were being sown. Thinkers were beginning to see the cosmos not just as a divine mystery, but as a complex clockwork mechanism, a grand machine set in motion by God. Salimbeni, who was known to be intellectually curious, may have been channeling this emerging worldview. His Sphera Mundi could be a theological statement for the new age, the universe as a perfect divine mechanism, intricate and lawful in its design. In this light, the object is not anachronistic at all, but rather prophetic, a vision of a scientific understanding of the cosmos that was just beginning to dawn. Yet, for those who entertain the possibility of ancient astronauts or pre-modern technological knowledge, the painting presents a far more radical proposition. Could Salimbeni have had access to a description or even a damaged artifact of an advanced device? Or more speculatively, was he attempting to depict a vision of a technological object that was revealed to him in a moment of spiritual inspiration, an image for which he had no contemporary context? The antennae are the most challenging detail to explain away as pure symbolism. They serve no obvious decorative or heraldic purpose, and their functional appearance is simply too pronounced. The object, therefore, sits at a fascinating crossroads. It can be comfortably explained as a unique take on a traditional symbol, filtered through a nascent scientific mindset. But its unsettling specificity also allows for the tantalizing idea that it represents something else entirely, a fragment of lost knowledge, a glimpse of a technology not of this world, or an artistic intuition of a future that was centuries away. It forces us to acknowledge that the human imagination, even when constrained by religious doctrine, can sometimes produce images that defy easy explanation, leaving a puzzle in plain sight upon a church altar for all to see. Crossing now from the European tradition to the artistic heritage of Japan, we find a different cultural lens focused on the same mysterious skies and seas. During the Edo period in the early 19th century, a unique form of storytelling and entertainment flourished known as atsushi-e, or reflected pictures. These were elaborate magic lantern shows where painted glass slides were projected onto screens, creating moving images that captivated audiences. It is from this world of popular spectacle that two remarkable folio paintings have survived, each depicting a scene so strange it feels drawn from science fiction. The first painting captures a moment of discovery on a windswept beach. A group of Japanese fishermen have gathered around a peculiar object that has drifted onto the shore. The vessel is unlike any boat they have ever seen. It is roughly 10 to 15 feet in diameter, shaped like a hollowed-out wooden rice bowl or a large inverted Kosa hat, with distinct, sharp-angled ridges running along its dome. Its surface is marked with unusual patterns, and it features small, square windows made of a transparent crystal or glass-like material. The fishermen, their postures a mix of caution and intense curiosity, are shown peering into this strange craft, trying to understand what it could possibly be. The second painting presents an even more dramatic scene, showing the same type of object not grounded, but in its natural element, hovering or floating effortlessly over the open sea, its base skimming the waves. This depiction solidifies the object's anomalous nature. This is no ordinary boat that has simply lost its way. It is a vessel capable of movement without sails, oars, or any visible means of propulsion. But the legend associated with these paintings, recorded in various texts of the time, provides the most fascinating detail of all. According to the tale, when the fishermen on the beach managed to open the strange craft, they found inside a single, beautiful young woman. She was dressed in clothing made from unknown, luxurious fabrics, and her speech was completely incomprehensible, a language no one had ever heard. She clutched a small, lacquered box close to her chest, which she would not allow anyone to touch or open. The fishermen, bewildered and bound by local customs, ultimately decided they could not keep her. They placed her back inside her strange vessel, pushed it out to sea, and watched as it drifted away, never to be seen again. To understand these images, we must view them through the rich tapestry of Edo period Japanese folklore. This was an era when the islands were largely isolated from the outside world, and tales of the mysterious and supernatural were a staple of popular culture. Stories of Utsuro Bune, or hollow ships, were part of a broader genre of kaiden, or strange tales. In this context, the beautiful, mute woman could easily be interpreted as a being from another realm, a spirit from the legendary hollow land under the sea, a visitor from a celestial kingdom, or a yokai, a supernatural entity. The box she protected so fiercely might have been seen as containing her soul, a powerful talisman, or a secret too dangerous for mortal men. The fishermen's actions then become a classic folkloric trope, the wise decision to reject the unknown and potentially dangerous gift from the otherworld, thereby restoring the natural order. Yet the specificity of the descriptions challenges a purely mythological interpretation. The object is not a vague, ethereal apparition. It is depicted with a consistent, almost technical detail across multiple accounts. The materials, wood and crystal, glass, the dimensions, the shape, and the functional windows all point toward a tangible, physical object. This has led many researchers to propose that the Utsuro Bune legend may be based on a real, witnessed event. Could a strange, foreign vessel have indeed washed ashore on the Japanese coast? One compelling theory suggests it might have been a damaged or lost European-style lifeboat or a small, rudimentary submarine, its foreign occupant unable to communicate with the local villagers. Another, more speculative idea points to the possibility of a sophisticated, unknown craft. Its technology so far advanced that the only way for the witnesses to process it was to describe it in terms of familiar objects like bowls and hats. The woman's protective behavior over the box could indicate it contained something of immense value or importance: navigational instruments, personal effects, or even technology she was tasked with guarding. These paintings, therefore, stand as a powerful example of the intersection between folklore and potential fact. They remind us that before a strange event becomes a myth, it begins as a reported sighting, a collective experience that a community then struggles to explain using the cultural tools at its disposal. The Utsushi paintings are not just art, they are perhaps the closest thing we have to a police sketch from 1800s Japan. A detailed visual record of an encounter that defied explanation, leaving a beautiful, silent mystery adrift on the waves of history. Continuing our exploration of strange aerial phenomena recorded in art, we now turn from large-scale paintings and tapestries to the more intimate, yet equally compelling, world of medieval manuscripts and printed broadsheets. These were the newspapers and history books of their day, and within their pages and on their single sheets, we find some of the most dramatic and well-documented accounts of mass sightings, events that reportedly sent entire towns into a state of fear and confusion. Our journey takes us to 3 specific instances, each separated by centuries, yet connected by a common thread of inexplicable celestial conflict. The first account is one of the earliest and most detailed of its kind, preserved in the monastic chronicles known as the Annals Lauricenses, which document the history of the Frankish kingdom. The entry for the year 776 describes a truly astonishing event during the siege of the castle of Sigeberg. As the pagan Saxon forces laid siege to the Christian Franks, the chronicle records that the defenders, and presumably the attackers as well, witnessed a magnificent and terrifying sight in the sky. They saw what appeared to be 2 large, flaming shields described as ignea or fiery, moving at great speed above the church. These objects did not simply drift, they maneuvered, darting back and forth through the air in what was perceived as a fierce aerial battle. To the Frankish defenders, this was interpreted as a divine intervention, a clear sign that God and his angels were fighting on their behalf. The chronicle states that the sight filled the Saxon besiegers with such terror that they broke their siege and fled, granting a miraculous victory to the Franks. This account is fascinating because it transcends mere symbolism. It describes active, intelligent movement and a direct, consequential impact on human events, recorded not as a legend but as a factual entry in a historical record. The description of 2 large shields, reddish in color, moving here and there above the church, is strikingly literal, forcing us to ask what tangible phenomenon could have been witnessed that fit this description and had such a profound psychological effect on an army of hardened warriors. Centuries later, in the German city of Nuremberg, an event occurred that was so widely witnessed and so shocking that it was immortalized in a printed broadsheet, a kind of mass-produced news circular, in 1561. The text describes the morning of April 14th, when the citizens of the city awoke to a truly apocalyptic scene in the dawn sky. They saw what appeared to be numerous spherical objects, some in a tubular or cylindrical shape, all engaged in a violent, chaotic dogfight. The broadsheet's illustration, a woodcut, depicts these objects soaring and diving, with smoke and fire pouring from some as they appeared to crash to the earth outside the city. The text vividly describes the confrontation, stating that the globes and long tubes fought with each other for over an hour until they exhausted themselves and faded away, with several crashing and generating a great steam of smoke. The report concludes by saying the event was seen by many men and women and was interpreted as a divine warning, a sign from God. This is not a vague account of lights. It is a detailed report of a sustained, complex aerial engagement involving multiple distinct types of craft. The specificity of the shapes, spheres, and cylinders, and the description of their interactive, aggressive behavior moves this far beyond a simple atmospheric phenomenon like a sundog or a meteor shower. The people of Nuremberg were clearly describing a structured, technological event for which they had no vocabulary, leading them to interpret it through the only lens they had, a heavenly omen or a battle of celestial forces made visible. Just 5 years after the spectacle over Nuremberg, a remarkably similar event unfolded in the skies over Basel, Switzerland. A broadsheet from 1566 documents this incredible occurrence, which took place over several days in August. According to the report, numerous black spheres were seen flying at high speed in front of the sun, moving with great speed and turning against each other as if fighting. The description notes that they changed color from a dark black to a fiery red, as if they were becoming heated from the intense motion. The account states that the objects were seen repeatedly and that their appearance caused great fright among the population. This Basel sighting shares uncanny parallels with the Nuremberg event. The multiple objects, the high speed, seemingly intelligent maneuvering described as a fight, and the widespread public panic it induced. The fact that these two nearly identical reports emerged from different cities within a short time frame suggests that whatever was occurring was not an isolated local anomaly, but part of a broader, unexplained aerial phenomenon being witnessed across Central Europe during that period. The chroniclers of both events did their best to document what they saw with the language available to them, leaving behind not just art, but first-hand journalistic accounts of mass witnesses confronting the utterly inexplicable. These three records, from the Frankish Chronicle to the German and Swiss broadsheets, form a powerful trifecta of historical testimony. They push us to consider that our sky has been a stage for unexplained aerial activity for far longer than the modern UFO era, and that our ancestors were not just creating symbolic art, but were often doing their level best to document, in ink and paint, genuinely bewildering events that they feared might be the harbingers of the end of the world. Now, let's examine another Renaissance masterpiece that elevates the very idea of a heavenly vehicle from symbolic form to jaw-dropping, intricate spectacle. Hanging in the National Gallery in London, Francesco Botticini's The Assumption of the Virgin, painted between 1490 and 1491, is a monumental work that depicts the moment Mary's body and soul are taken up into heaven. At the center of this vibrant scene, the Virgin is not simply floating on a cloud. She is enclosed within an enormous, radiant mandorla, that almond-shaped aureole of light traditionally used in Christian art to frame divine figures. But Botticini's mandorla is anything but traditional. It is an astonishingly complex, multi-layered structure, a swirling vortex of concentric circles populated by dozens of angelic figures, all set against a background of geometric precision and shimmering golden rays. This is not a soft, ethereal glow. It is a massive, engineered-looking vehicle, a celestial machine of breathtaking detail and power. To appreciate why this painting stands out, we need to understand the artistic intentions behind it. Botticini was working in Florence during the height of the Renaissance, a period obsessed with mathematical perspective, architectural harmony, and the detailed representation of the natural and divine worlds. His aim was to create a vision of heaven that felt both wondrous and logically ordered, a universe governed by divine geometry. In this context, the mandala can be seen as the ultimate symbol of that cosmic order, a visual representation of the celestial spheres, the layered heavens through which Mary ascends to be crowned by Christ. Each ring of angels represents a different choir in the heavenly hierarchy, from seraphim to cherubim, all revolving in perfect harmony around the central figure. The golden rays emanating from the structure are the uncreated light of God, and the whole composition is a masterclass in using art to illustrate complex theological concepts about the structure of the universe and the soul's journey to God. This is the established and perfectly valid interpretation. Botticini painted a spiritual diagram of breathtaking beauty. However, when you set aside the theological context and simply look at the object with modern eyes, its appearance is startlingly anachronistic. The mandala's construction is fiercely geometric. The angels are not floating randomly. They are arranged in precise, concentric bands, creating the impression of rotating sections or decks. The entire structure has a distinct front and back, with the rays projecting forward like the focused energy of a propulsion system or a navigational array. The layered, circular bands, one inside the other, bring to mind nothing so much as the concept of a multi-stage rocket or a sophisticated orbital vehicle. Some observers have even noted that the overall shape, with its tapered ends and bulging center, resembles a classic flying saucer or a detailed depiction of a generational ship designed for long-duration travel through the cosmos. The sheer mechanical complexity Botticini invested in this divine vessel is what fuels the alternative perspective. It feels less like a vague aura and more like a blueprint for a piece of advanced technology. This raises a fascinating question about the nature of divine inspiration itself. Could an artist like Botticini, striving to visualize the ultimate heavenly vehicle, have tapped into a creative wellspring that produced an image resonating with future technological concepts? Or is it possible that descriptions of divine ascents in religious texts of chariots of fire and thrones that move themselves stem from ancient encounters with advanced machinery that witnesses could only describe in the language of their time? Botticini's magnificent mandala sits at the heart of this enigma. It is simultaneously a profound work of religious art and a compelling visual puzzle. It challenges us to consider whether the divine and the technological are always separate categories, or if, in the mind of a visionary artist, they can fuse into a single, unforgettable image, a glimpse of a heavenly ascent that looks, for all the world, like a starship embarking on its final journey home. While the two cherubs at the foot of Raphael's Sistine Madonna have become some of the most reproduced figures in all of art, their wistful faces have perhaps distracted us from the true mystery unfolding in the painting's upper reaches. Completed between 1512 and 1513 for the monastery of San Sisto in Piacenza, this is arguably Raphael's supreme achievement, a work of sublime balance and spiritual grace. The Virgin Mary stands on a platform of clouds presenting the infant Christ to the world, flanked by Saint Sixtus and Saint Barbara. Yet, behind this iconic group, the background is not the simple, golden-hued sky of a typical Renaissance heaven. Instead, it is a vast, shadowy space, densely populated by a multitude of indistinct, almost ethereal faces emerging from a peculiar, greenish-tinged haze. To the conventional eye, these are simply the cherubim and seraphim of the heavenly host, the cloud of witnesses to this divine presentation. But a closer, more questioning look reveals anomalies that have fueled speculation for decades. The first striking feature is the texture and quality of this background itself. It lacks the soft, fluffy definition of the clouds upon which the saints stand. It appears more as a mist, a vaporous expanse that feels deep and atmospheric, more akin to looking into a nebulous void or the interior of a vast, enclosed space than gazing at an open sky. The countless faces that populate this zone are not the distinct, joyful cherubs we see below. They are hauntingly vague, their features blurred and generalized, as if they are not individual beings but representations of a collective consciousness or perhaps even reflections on a curved, translucent surface. Their arrangement is not random. They recede into the distance, creating a powerful illusion of depth that suggests an immense volume, a chamber of souls extending far beyond the picture plane. This architectural quality is crucial to the alternative interpretation. Some researchers propose that Raphael did not paint a sky at all, but rather the interior of a colossal vessel, a generational ship or a biodome with the Virgin and Child being presented to its inhabitants. In this radical reading, the clouds at their feet become a form of atmospheric condensation or a platform within this craft, and the drawn-back curtains, held by tiny, barely visible figures, symbolize the opening of a viewport or a gateway into this otherworldly environment. This theory gains further traction when we consider the artist's own intellectual context. Raphael was not merely a devout painter. He was a central figure in the High Renaissance, moving in circles that were deeply engaged with Neoplatonic philosophy, esoteric knowledge, and the study of ancient texts. The early 16th century was a time when Hermetic and Kabbalistic ideas were secretly circulating among the European elite, positing the existence of other worlds, celestial hierarchies, and the possibility of travel between spheres. Is it so far-fetched to imagine that Raphael, privy to such speculative ideas, might have encoded a vision of a populated cosmos into his most famous religious commission? The indistinct faces could then be understood as representations of other forms of life, a celestial citizenry to whom the Christian Savior is being revealed. This transforms the painting from a straightforward religious icon into a cosmic proclamation, a statement that Christ's message is not for Earth alone, but for all intelligent beings across the universe. A more mystical interpretation suggests that Raphael was attempting to visualize a spiritual reality described in esoteric Christian and Jewish traditions. The dense field of faces resonates with the concept of the Adam Kadmon, the primordial man whose body contains all the souls of humanity. The vague, overlapping visages would then symbolize this unified, spiritual body of creation, with the Christ child representing the perfected, divine spark at its center. Similarly, the structure could be seen as a depiction of the pleroma, the divine fullness or the spiritual universe in Gnostic thought, from which all divinity emanates. Raphael, in his genius, may have been using the visual language of his faith to hint at these deeper, more complex cosmological doctrines, knowing that only the initiated would understand the full meaning. Whether viewed as a speculative vision of extraterrestrial life or a coded map of hidden spiritual truths, the Sistine Madonna challenges our passive acceptance of religious art. It asks us to look past the familiar angels and to peer into the mysterious, populated depths of the background, where Raphael may have hidden his most profound and revolutionary ideas about our place in a vast and perhaps shared cosmos. Now, let's step away from the biblical heavens and sacred visions for a moment and enter the realm of classical mythology, where gods and mortals intertwine. Our focus turns to a masterpiece by the German Renaissance painter Lucas Cranach the Elder, titled The Judgment of Paris, created around 1528. This painting depicts one of the most famous stories from Greek legend, the moment the Trojan prince Paris is tasked with awarding a golden apple to the most beautiful among three goddesses, Juno, Minerva, and Venus. Cranach's composition is lush and detailed, set in a romanticized Germanic landscape, with the three nude goddesses vying for Paris's favor while Mercury looks on. It is a scene rich with allegory, representing the folly of vanity and the power of desire. Yet, if you let your gaze drift from the central drama up into the serene blue sky in the upper left corner, you will find a curious and seemingly out-of-place detail. There, hovering silently and unobtrusively, is a small, dark, disc-shaped object. Its placement is deliberate yet puzzling. It is set apart from the main action, disconnected from the mythological figures below. It doesn't emit light or beams. It is simply a solid, dark disk floating in an otherwise empty portion of the sky. This object has no apparent correlation to any known element of the Judgment of Paris myth. In the classical telling, the goddesses arrive on the scene. Paris makes his fateful choice that will ultimately lead to the Trojan War, and the heavens do not typically intervene with strange, silent crafts. So what exactly did Cranach intend for us to see? One school of thought suggests this could be a simple artistic flourish, a pentimento or an accidental drip of paint that has been misinterpreted by modern eyes. However, Cranach was a meticulous and highly prolific artist, known for his precise workshop methods and clear, detailed compositions. A random smudge in such a prominent old masterwork is highly unlikely. Another possibility is that it represents a symbolic element. In Renaissance art, celestial bodies like the sun and moon were often included to signify the cosmic importance of an event. Yet, these are almost always clearly defined: a golden sun with rays or a crescent moon. This object is neither. It is an unadorned, dark disk, lacking any of the traditional attributes of a heavenly body. Could it be a symbolic representation of the apple of discord itself, cast into the heavens as a reminder of the conflict it has sparked? This is a more poetic interpretation, but it remains speculative, as this particular symbolism is not a standard part of the iconography for this scene. This leads us to the more intriguing interpretation that Cranach might have been documenting an atmospheric anomaly or an unidentified aerial object. The 16th century was a period of great celestial curiosity and fear, with comets and unusual weather phenomena often recorded in chronicles as omens. Perhaps Cranach or someone in his circle witnessed a dark, circular cloud formation, a rare meteorological event like a lenticular cloud or something more anomalous. An artist of his time, steeped in a worldview that blended the natural and the supernatural, might have seen such a sight as a portent or a sign, and subtly woven it into the background of a mythological tale. Its dark, silent, and observant presence could be read as a symbolic witness to the vanity and folly unfolding below, a silent judge from above observing the flawed judgment of a mortal. What makes this small disk so compelling is its very ambiguity. It doesn't demand attention like the beam of light in Crivelli's Annunciation, nor does it provoke a reaction from figures in the painting like the object in The Madonna with Saint Giovannino. It is simply there, a quiet, unexplained detail in a scene that is otherwise overflowing with clear narrative meaning. This forces us to confront the possibility that artists sometimes included elements in their work that were personal, observational, or rooted in local lore, details that modern art historians focused on mythology and symbolism might easily overlook. Cranach's dark disk serves as a perfect metaphor for the entire pursuit of uncovering these mysteries. Sometimes the most profound questions are not shouted from the center of the canvas, but whispered from its quietest corners. Now, as we journey back even further in time to the very dawn of the Renaissance, we find ourselves standing in one of the most sacred and revolutionary spaces in the entire history of art, the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, Italy. Here, around the year 1305, the pioneering master Giotto di Bondone covered the walls with a breathtaking fresco cycle depicting the lives of the Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ. Giotto was a revolutionary. He broke free from the flat, stylized conventions of Byzantine art to introduce a stunning new sense of realism, emotion, and three-dimensional space. His figures have weight, their faces show genuine feeling, and their dramas unfold in settings that feel tangible and real. It is within this context of groundbreaking naturalism that we encounter one of the most perplexing details in the entire chapel. In the panel depicting the arrest of Christ, or the kiss of Judas, as the mob descends upon Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, Giotto painted the night sky. And there, amidst the turmoil and betrayal, hangs a peculiar saucer-shaped object from which a single trailing beam of light descends diagonally toward the scene below. The object itself is rendered with a stark simplicity that makes it stand out against the deep blue of the night. It is a solid, light-colored disk, and emanating from its center is a thin, clear beam that cuts through the darkness. This is not a soft, diffused heavenly glow. It is a precise, linear trail, almost like a laser pointer or a spotlight being cast from above. In the traditional iconography of the scene, this element is typically interpreted as a symbolic representation of the moon. The moon is often included in depictions of the Passion to signify the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy that the moon will turn to blood, or that darkness will cover the land during this pivotal moment. Yet, Giotto's depiction is strangely literal and mechanistic for a symbol. He painted other moons in the chapel cycle, and they are clearly defined as crescents or soft, round spheres. This object is different. Its combination of a solid disk with a distinct, straight beam gives it an operational quality, as if it is an active participant observing or perhaps even illuminating the event, rather than a passive celestial body simply hanging in the sky. This brings us to the core of the mystery. Giotto was an artist obsessed with realism. He was the first to truly paint people as they were, in spaces that felt real. He studied nature and human emotion intently. So why, in this most dramatic and emotionally charged scene, would he insert an element that looks so unlike a natural moon? If his goal was pure symbolic shorthand, he could have easily painted a standard crescent. Instead, he chose this specific, anomalous form. One compelling theory is that Giotto was indeed painting a moon, but he was attempting to depict a specific lunar phenomenon. Perhaps he had witnessed a lunar halo or a rare atmospheric event where light pillars or other optical effects created the appearance of a beam shining from the moon itself. Being a keen observer of the natural world, he may have painted exactly what he had seen, translating a rare but real optical illusion into his biblical narrative. For Giotto, this would have been an act of realism, not symbolism, a record of a natural wonder that he then associated with the profound darkness of the Passion story. Another perspective considers Giotto's deep theological understanding. The beam of light shines directly toward the chaotic scene of betrayal, almost like a divine spotlight. Could this be Giotto's way of visualizing the eye of God, or a celestial witness observing the unfolding tragedy? The object then becomes not a moon, but a vehicle for divine observation, a throned chariot or a Merkaba, similar to the visions of Ezekiel from which God watches his son's sacrifice begin. This interpretation aligns with the innovative spirit of Giotto's work. He wasn't just illustrating a story, he was visualizing the unseen spiritual realities that surrounded it. He was making the divine presence tangible and immediate for the viewer, using a visual language that, to our modern eyes, appears strangely technological. The most tantalizing question, of course, is whether Giotto or his patrons had heard accounts or even witnessed something in the skies that defied explanation. In an age before widespread light pollution, the night sky was a vast, clear canvas for unexplained phenomena. A bright, stationary light with a visible beam could have been a topic of local discussion, an event interpreted as a holy omen. Giotto, commissioned by the wealthy Enrico Scrovegni to atone for the sin of usury, may have been instructed to include this sign as part of the chapel's intricate theological program. A reminder that even in the darkest hour of betrayal, heaven was watching. Giotto's saucer, therefore, is a perfect enigma. It can be comfortably explained as a highly stylized moon, yet its unique presentation forces us to acknowledge the artist's relentless drive to innovate. It exists at the fascinating intersection where emerging realism, deep faith, and the potential for a recorded anomaly all converge, leaving us to wonder if the father of Western painting might have also been one of our first and most eloquent UFO documentarians. Deep within the historic seat of the Archbishop of Canterbury at Lambeth Palace in London lies a hidden and haunting artifact from a turbulent period of religious strife. High on a wall in what is known as the Lollards Tower, a 15th-century mural, now faded and obscure, presents a scene of stark simplicity and profound unease. It depicts a single, solitary figure, his arm outstretched, pointing urgently toward the sky. The object of his alarm is a large, black, billowing form, a shape that rises from the horizon like a colossal, dark mushroom cloud. Its appearance is unmistakably ominous, a stark blot against the sky that seems to capture a moment of collective terror or divine warning. This is not a gentle celestial body or a stylized angel. It is an anomaly, an event, and its presence in such a specific location makes its interpretation all the more compelling. To fully grasp the weight of this image, we must understand the tower that gives it its name and the dark history contained within those stone walls. The Lollards were followers of John Wycliffe, a 14th-century theologian who dared to challenge the authority and doctrines of the Catholic Church, advocating for the translation of the Bible into English and criticizing church wealth and corruption. The establishment saw them as dangerous heretics, and the Lollards Tower earned its name because it was used as a prison for these dissidents. Many were held, interrogated, and tortured within its confines before being burned at the stake. The mural, therefore, was painted in a place of immense suffering and religious persecution, a backdrop of fear and righteous judgment. The figure pointing at the sky could easily be interpreted as a Lollard prisoner, witnessing a divine sign that validates his cause, or conversely, as a church official interpreting the same phenomenon as God's wrath against heresy. This historical context is crucial as it frames the possible interpretations of the strange object. In the medieval worldview, unusual events in the heavens were rarely seen as neutral natural phenomena. They were divine messages, omens of impending doom or signs of celestial favor. A dark, explosive cloud shape would almost certainly have been viewed as a portent of disaster, a warning of plague, war, or divine punishment. The mural could be a direct illustration of such a belief, created to remind all who saw it of the consequences of straying from orthodoxy. The very architecture of the cloud is what makes it so visually arresting to a modern audience. Its mushroom cloud resemblance is, of course, anachronistic, as no one in the 15th century could have conceived of a nuclear explosion. Yet, the similarity is uncanny, prompting us to consider what other phenomena could produce such a distinct, towering, and dark form. One plausible explanation lies in powerful but natural atmospheric events. A massive, developing cumulonimbus cloud, particularly one associated with a supercell thunderstorm, can take on a formidable, anvil-shaped appearance that might be rendered by a medieval artist as a looming, mushroom-like form. Alternatively, the eruption of a distant volcano, like the 1452 eruption of Kiwi in Vanuatu, which was one of the largest of the millennium, could have spewed ash high into the atmosphere. Volcanic plumes can travel vast distances and, seen from afar, appear as a stationary, dark, spreading cloud on the horizon. For people in England with no knowledge of the volcanic source, such a sight would have been profoundly frightening and ripe for interpretation as an omen. This naturalistic explanation grounds the mural in a potentially real, witnessed event, which was then filtered through the religious and superstitious lens of the time. However, the very specificity of the mural, a single figure pointing directly at the phenomenon, suggests something more than a generic representation of a bad omen. It feels like a record. The figure's gesture is one of identification and witness, as if saying, "Look, there it is." This leads to the more speculative possibility that the painter was documenting an unidentified aerial phenomenon that produced a dark, lingering, cloud-like residue. Could it have been the aftermath of some form of aerial combustion or an unknown atmospheric energy discharge that left a persistent, structured cloud? The mural refuses to give us easy answers. It exists as a powerful, silent testament to a moment when the sky itself seemed to betray a message of terror, forever captured on the wall of a prison for heretics. It reminds us that the human impulse to look to the skies for meaning or for menace is timeless, and that sometimes the most chilling historical records are not written in words but painted in shadow on a forgotten wall. Moving from the hallowed halls of chapels and monasteries, we arrive at the raw, chaotic energy of the battlefield, where another layer of this mystery unfolds. Among the vast corpus of Renaissance art, there exists a fascinating and often reproduced painting whose artist remains unknown, but whose central enigma is strikingly clear. The scene is one of pure 16th century warfare. Armored knights on powerful steeds clash with infantry, their lances and pikes forming a thicket of violence, while billowing smoke from early cannons drifts across a landscape of conflict. The detail is meticulous, capturing the grit and fury of a period siege or cavalry charge. Yet, when you pull your gaze away from the terrestrial struggle and lift it to the sky above the fray, the context of the entire image shifts. There, suspended in the air with an impossible stillness, is a perfectly formed metallic, disc-shaped object. Its appearance is not soft or cloud-like. It has a hard, reflective surface, rendered in a silvery gray hue that distinguishes it sharply from the natural blues and whites of the surrounding atmosphere. It looks for all the world like a classic flying saucer hovering as a silent, dispassionate observer to the human conflict below. This painting is a prime example of the challenges inherent in researching some of these compelling but obscure works. Unlike a signed masterpiece by Botticini or a well-documented fresco by Giotto, this piece often circulates in UFO literature without a firm provenance. Its exact location, artist, and even its current whereabouts are frequently unverified. It exists in the realm of digital copies and reprinted images, which makes the task of authentication incredibly difficult. Is it a genuine 16th century panel that has been lost to the records of major museums? Could it be a later creation, perhaps from the 19th century, intentionally made in a Renaissance style? Or, in the most skeptical view, is it a modern hoax, a clever pastiche designed to fuel contemporary myths? These questions are not trivial. They sit at the heart of responsible historical inquiry. Without the ability to examine the brushstrokes, the aging of the wood panel or canvas, and the chemical composition of the pigments, we are left relying on stylistic analysis and the reputation of the sources that present it. This ambiguity forces a necessary caution, reminding us that the allure of a mystery can sometimes outpace the available evidence. However, if we proceed with the assumption that the painting is a legitimate period piece, its imagery becomes profoundly significant. The object's placement is not marginal or symbolic in the way a heraldic shield or a symbolic sun might be. It is centrally located in the sky, a focal point that competes with the battle for the viewer's attention. The artist has taken clear pains to render it with a tangible, metallic solidity, using highlights and shading to suggest a three-dimensional, manufactured form. This level of deliberate detail suggests the object was an integral part of the artist's intended composition, not a later addition or a random flourish. So what could a Renaissance painter have been trying to convey? One interpretation is that the artist was employing a well-established symbolic language. In many historical battles, chroniclers reported divine interventions, crosses appearing in the sky, visions of patron saints, or heavenly hosts fighting alongside the faithful. This disc could be a localized, unique representation of such divine oversight. Perhaps it was meant to symbolize the eye of providence or God's chariot, observing the battle and guiding the fate of one side to victory. In an era without a standardized iconography for UFOs, an artist imagining a divine vehicle might well conceive of a smooth, perfect metallic disc as the ultimate representation of heavenly technology and order. Yet, the very specificity of this heavenly technology is what resonates so powerfully with the modern viewer. It lacks any of the familiar attributes of a divine manifestation. No angelic figures, no wings, no flowing robes or beams of spiritual light. Its aesthetic is purely mechanical. This opens the door to the possibility that the painter was working from a different source entirely, eyewitness testimony. Imagine the scene: a fierce battle is underway, the air thick with the sounds of clashing metal and the cries of men, when a strange, silent, and shimmering object appears overhead. Such an event would have been utterly terrifying and inexplicable to the soldiers below. News of the event would have spread, and an artist commissioned to record the battle might have been instructed to include this portent in the sky. With no framework for extraterrestrial visitors, the artist would have rendered the object using the most advanced technological concepts available, perhaps envisioning it as a new kind of engineered shield or a mysterious cannonball from God. The painting then becomes less a symbolic allegory and more a historical document, a visual report of an unexplained aerial incident that occurred during a time of war, preserved on canvas because it was too significant to the witnesses to be omitted. This battle scene, with its silent, hovering disc, ultimately encapsulates the core dilemma of our entire investigation. It exists in a space between verified history and compelling anomaly. Whether it is a genuine artifact depicting a real event, a unique artistic symbol, or a clever forgery, its power lies in its ability to perfectly crystallize the question we have been asking throughout this journey. When our ancestors looked up, what extraordinary sights were they trying to capture for us, using the only vocabulary they had? As we venture from the battlefields of anonymous masters into the very heart of the Vatican itself, we encounter a fresco that is both a cornerstone of church history and a canvas brimming with celestial ambiguity. Painted by Giulio Romano and his workshop between 1520 and 1524, the Vision of Constantine adorns the Sala di Costantino, a room dedicated to celebrating the first Christian Roman emperor. The scene captures the legendary moment on the eve of the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in the year 312, when Emperor Constantine reportedly looked to the heavens and saw a vision of a cross of light accompanied by the Greek words, "In this sign you shall conquer." This vision, as the story goes, led to his conversion to Christianity and his subsequent victory, a pivotal event that changed the course of Western history. Giulio Romano, a principal pupil of Raphael, renders this moment with high Renaissance drama. Constantine is shown in his tent, his face a mixture of awe and terror as he points upward, directing our gaze to the sky above his encamped army. And here, the artist's interpretation of this divine sign becomes the source of our modern intrigue. The sky in the fresco is not a passive backdrop. It is a tumultuous, active space dominated by swirling, dark storm clouds that have been violently parted. From within this rupture in the heavens, a brilliant, otherworldly light pours forth, but the form of this light is what captures the attention. While a cross is faintly suggested by the arrangement of the clouds and light, the most dominant features are not the clear, defined lines of a crucifix. Instead, we see powerful, solid, beam-like structures projecting downward from the cloud bank. These are not soft, diffused rays of heavenly glory. They are distinct, parallel shafts of light, precise and focused, cutting through the night air with an intensity that feels less like an ethereal vision and more like a physical projection. Their angular, almost mechanical quality gives the impression of searchlights, the kind of targeted, illuminating beams that might emanate from a powerful, hidden source located within or behind the cloud cover itself. This is a far cry from the gentle, all-encompassing radiance typically used to represent divine presence in religious art. To understand why this depiction is so striking, we must consider the artist and his context. Giulio Romano was working directly under the patronage of the Medici Pope Leo X in the Apostolic Palace itself. This was not a space for artistic heresy or fanciful improvisation. Every brushstroke was approved and served a clear propagandistic purpose: to glorify the Church and its foundational myths. Romano was a master of the Mannerist style, which often favored dramatic, theatrical, and even artificially elegant compositions over strict naturalism. So, was he simply using his artistic license to create a more dynamic and awe-inspiring version of the vision? Instead of painting a simple, glowing cross, he may have chosen to represent the overwhelming effect of the vision, the earth-shattering light that supposedly blinded Constantine and his troops. The beam-like structures could thus be a stylistic representation of that explosive divine power, a visual metaphor for the sheer force of the revelation breaking into the human world. This interpretation aligns perfectly with the room's function, to stun visitors with the power and legitimacy of the church's origin story. Yet, the visual evidence on the wall presents a compelling counter-argument. The precision of the beams is difficult to ignore. They do not fan out or diffuse like natural light. They maintain their parallel integrity over a distance, suggesting a focused source. This has led many researchers to propose that Romano's fresco may inadvertently document a different kind of event entirely. Imagine the historical moment. Constantine and his army, camped before a decisive battle, are desperate for a sign. Then an unusual atmospheric phenomenon occurs, perhaps a rare and powerful formation of lenticular clouds, backlit by the moon, creates the illusion of a cross and projects columns of light downward. Or, more speculatively, could they have witnessed something more technological? The beams are eerily reminiscent of the focused light from a powerful, elevated source, like the spotlights from a large, unseen aerial vehicle obscured by the low cloud cover. In this scenario, the event was real and witnessed by many, but its true nature was incomprehensible. The only framework available to Constantine and his chroniclers was the religious one. The vision of the cross was the narrative constructed to make sense of an inexplicable aerial display that, coincidentally or not, preceded his victory. This painting, perhaps more than any other we have examined, lives in the tantalizing space between divinely inspired art and potential documentary evidence. It challenges us to consider that history's most pivotal spiritual moments might have been triggered by tangible, physical events in the sky, events that were interpreted through the lens of faith because no other lens existed. Giulio Romano, tasked with enshrining this legend, may have created the most accurate depiction he could based on the accounts passed down through the centuries. In doing so, he left us with a powerful image that can be read in two ways: as a masterpiece of holy theater, or as a startlingly precise illustration of a celestial encounter that forever altered the destiny of Rome. The beams of light in the Vatican fresco continue to shine down, not just on a sleeping emperor, but on our own understanding of where faith ends and phenomenon begins. Making our way to the heart of the Far East, we find an artwork that feels both deeply mystical and startlingly familiar. Housed within Japan's historic Daitokuji Temple, a Zen Buddhist sanctuary in Kyoto, is a remarkable Chinese silk painting dating to around the year 1400. The scene is one of tranquil nature, a serene landscape of mountains, water, and trees, a classic subject meant for quiet contemplation. But this calm is dramatically broken by the sky, where a magnificent and terrifying object dominates the heavens. It is a vast fiery wheel, a churning vortex of red, orange, and yellow flames, streaking horizontally through the air as if propelled by some immense unseen force. Its form is not solid like a disk. It is an energetic, rotating mass, a celestial pinwheel of fire leaving a luminous trail in its wake. To the scholar or monk viewing this centuries ago, this was likely a depiction of a dragon pearl or a flying pearl, a well-documented phenomenon in the chronicles of both China and Japan. Ancient texts from these cultures are filled with accounts of these mysterious luminosities. Chinese historians and poets wrote of flying pearls, brilliant, self-illuminated spheres that would appear suddenly, drift over villages, and sometimes even enter homes before darting away. They were often described as being the size of a pear or a melon, glowing with a soft, pearlescent light, and capable of incredible speeds and abrupt changes in direction. In Japanese folklore, these objects were frequently called dragon pearls, believed to be the luminous orbs carried by dragons, the mythical creatures of the sky and water. Possessing a dragon pearl was said to grant immense wisdom and power, and their appearance was often interpreted as an omen, sometimes of good fortune, sometimes of impending change or disaster. The Decoding painting can be seen as a direct visualization of these widespread folkloric and historical accounts, translating the oral and written descriptions of a glowing sphere into a more complex, wheel-like form to convey its dynamic, rotating energy. This connection reveals a fascinating cross-cultural thread that spans the globe. While European artists were painting shields and fiery discs in their skies, Asian observers were documenting these luminous spheres and fiery wheels. The fundamental similarity is impossible to ignore. Across continents and entirely separate civilizations, people were looking up and witnessing strikingly similar classes of unexplained aerial phenomena. The flying pearls of Asia bear an uncanny resemblance to the fiery shields reported over medieval Frankish castles or the glowing globes seen battling over Nuremberg. This consistency is profoundly significant. It effectively rules out the idea that these sightings were the product of a single culture's imagination or artistic style. Instead, it points toward the possibility of a persistent global phenomenon, observed independently by different peoples who then interpreted what they saw through their own unique cultural and spiritual lenses. The Chinese and Japanese, with their rich traditions of dragon mythology and celestial omens, saw mystical pearls. The medieval Europeans, with their chivalric codes and Christian theology, saw divine shields and battling angels. They were likely describing the same essential, unexplained event, but the story they told about it was framed by the world they knew. What could these flying pearls and fiery wheels have actually been? One compelling natural explanation points toward ball lightning, a rare and poorly understood atmospheric electrical phenomenon. Ball lightning can manifest as a glowing sphere, often during thunderstorms, and is known to hover, move erratically, and even pass through solid matter before vanishing or exploding, behavior that aligns perfectly with many ancient accounts of flying pearls. Another possibility is that witnesses were observing particularly bright meteors or fireballs, whose fragmentation in the atmosphere could create the illusion of a rotating, wheel-like structure of light. Yet the detailed descriptions from the chronicles, which often note the object's controlled, intelligent movement and extended duration, sometimes challenge these purely naturalistic explanations. The Decoding painting, therefore, stands as a beautiful and critical piece of this global puzzle. It is a testament to the universal human experience of witnessing the unexplained. It reminds us that the urge to document and make sense of the mysterious is not a modern obsession, but a timeless human impulse, one that connects a Zen monk in 15th century Kyoto to a fresco painter in medieval Serbia, all united by the same awe-inspiring question mark hanging in the sky above them. Now, let's turn the pages of history to a time when books were painstakingly hand-copied by monks, and illustrations served as vital visual records of the world and its wonders. In the 12th century, at the Benedictine Abbey of St. Albans in England, a monk and chronicler named Matthew Paris created one of the most important historical works of the Middle Ages, the Chronica Majora, or Greater Chronicle. This massive volume is a sprawling account of world history, filled with detailed narratives and, most importantly for our quest, hundreds of vivid illustrations. Among these drawings of kings, battles, and biblical events, there is one small but astonishing sketch that seems to leap out of its medieval context. It depicts a church, its architecture rendered with careful accuracy, but floating right beside its spire is a sleek, silvery, cigar-shaped object. It has a tapered nose and a rounded body, looking for all the world like a classic dirigible or a modern-day airship, a form of technology that would not appear for another 700 years. The immediate and most logical question is, what could this possibly represent? We are in the 1200s, a world defined by horse-drawn carts, stone castles, and sailing ships. The very concept of human flight was relegated to myth and legend, like the story of Icarus. There were no balloons, no gliders, certainly no metallic airships. So when a meticulous historian like Matthew Paris picked up his pen to illustrate his chronicle, he was not doodling fanciful ideas of future technology. Every mark on the page was intentional. One of the most common explanations put forward by art historians is that the object is a stylized representation of a ceremonial banner or a processional cross. Medieval churches often flew long, trailing banners from their steeples, especially during feast days, and these could be depicted in a stylized way that might resemble a solid, streamlined shape. In the artistic shorthand of the time, a banner blowing in the wind could be simplified into a single, elongated form, with the illustration focusing on its symbolic presence rather than its literal, fluttering fabric. However, this conventional explanation begins to feel less certain when you examine the drawing itself. The object is rendered with a distinct, smooth, and solid-looking hull. It lacks any of the frayed edges, tassels, or flowing lines that typically denote a piece of cloth in medieval art. Its placement is also peculiarly independent. It isn't attached to the spire by a pole or a line, but floats freely beside it, separated by a clear space that gives it an autonomous presence in the sky. This visual disconnect opens the door to other, more intriguing possibilities. Could Matthew Paris have been documenting an atmospheric anomaly? A particularly defined and persistent lenticular cloud, stationary in the sky next to the church, might have been so striking that the monk felt compelled to include it as a notable feature of the landscape. Or perhaps it was a rare and brilliant meteor, observed as a slow-moving, glowing cylinder passing near the abbey. To a medieval mind, such a sight would have been a potent omen, a sign from God worthy of recording alongside the political and religious events of the day. This leads us to the most provocative interpretation, that the illustration is a genuine attempt to document an unidentified flying object. Imagine the scene: a monk, looking out from his scriptorium window or walking the abbey grounds, sees a silent, metallic-looking, cylindrical object hovering near the church spire. He has no framework for aviation, no concept of machines that fly. The only vocabulary he has to describe it is drawn from the world around him. It might be described as a heavenly shield, a celestial spear, or a silver ship. When he comes to illustrate the event in his chronicle, he draws it with the same straightforward realism he applied to drawing the church itself, rendering the mysterious object as faithfully as he can. In this reading, the Chronica Majora becomes more than just a history book. It becomes a logbook of high strangeness, a 1200s equivalent of a modern-day UFO report filed by a highly respected and reliable source. The sheer credibility of the witness in this case is what makes the image so compelling. Matthew Paris was not a fringe figure. He was a renowned scholar, a cartographer, and a trusted historian. His work was considered authoritative in its time and remains a cornerstone for modern historians studying the period. He was not given to flights of fancy in his other illustrations, which are generally realistic and grounded. This lends a significant weight to the idea that he drew something he genuinely believed to be real and noteworthy. The tiny airship floating beside the church spire in the Chronica Majora ultimately serves as a powerful symbol of the entire mystery we are exploring. It demonstrates that the phenomenon, whatever its true nature, appears in the most reliable and unexpected of places. It asks us to consider that our medieval ancestors were not living in a world devoid of aerial mysteries, but were careful observers of their environment who, when confronted with the unexplainable, turned to their pens and parchment to leave a silent, enduring record for future generations to decipher. When we think of ancient Rome, we often picture legions of soldiers marching under their iconic rectangular shields, the scutum. But there exists a far more mysterious and sacred shield in Roman mythology, one whose origins are not of human craftsmanship, but of divine descent from the sky. These were the Ancilia, the 12 sacred shields of Mars, the god of war. According to legend, during the reign of the pious King Numa Pompilius, a shield of extraordinary design, perfectly curved and fashioned from a divine bronze, fell directly from the heavens as a gift from Jupiter himself. A prophet declared that the fate and security of Rome itself were now bound to this celestial artifact, but there was a catch. The shield had to be protected from theft or destruction at all costs. To confuse any potential thieves, the cunning king ordered 11 perfect copies to be made, creating a set of 12 identical shields. These sacred objects were then entrusted to an elite priesthood known as the Salii, or the leaping priests, who would carry them through the city each march in a wild, rhythmic processional dance, chanting ancient hymns to ensure Rome's military power and prosperity for the coming year. Now, while we do not possess a specific Renaissance painting labeled "The Ancilia Falling from Heaven," the myth itself is a powerful piece of cultural memory that begs to be examined through the lens of our investigation. The official Roman interpretation was purely religious. This was a pignora, a sacred pledge from the gods of their favor. But let's pause and consider the physical description of the original shield. It was not the practical, body-covering scutum of the legions. It was described as a figure of 8 shield, a shape with a narrow waist and 2 rounded lobes, or more commonly interpreted by historians as a simple, curved, oval or even circular shield. This is a crucial detail. A smooth, curved, metallic object descending from the sky and possessing immense power. Does this not sound like a familiar archetype? The story of the Ancilia presents a compelling scenario. What if the shield that fell was not a piece of divine armor at all, but a crashed, disc-shaped object of unknown origin? The ancient Romans, with no context for advanced technology, would have interpreted this strange, manufactured artifact through the only vocabulary they had. The most logical analogy for a curved, metallic object that could offer protection would be a warrior's shield. Its heavenly origin naturally placed it in the domain of the gods, specifically Mars, the deity most associated with battle. We can find echoes of this potential event in the art that has survived from the Roman world. Look at any number of Roman coins, reliefs, or frescoes depicting the Salii priests. They are almost always shown carrying small, curved, oval shields. While these are artistic representations of the ritual copies, they are stylized versions of the original heavenly gift. Could these depictions be a cultural echo, a sanitized and ritualized memory of a much stranger object? The profound importance placed upon the Ancilia, the fact that the very safety of the state was magically tied to its preservation, suggests this was no ordinary piece of religious paraphernalia. This was an object of immense, tangible power whose loss would mean catastrophe. This kind of belief often forms around a relic of a truly extraordinary first contact level event. The frantic measures taken by King Numa, creating 11 copies to hide the real one, speaks to a deep-seated fear of its loss, a fear that seems disproportionate if it were merely a symbol, but entirely understandable if it were a unique piece of otherworldly technology whose secrets the Romans did not want falling into rival hands. This Roman myth of a sky-born shield creates a fascinating bridge to the medieval and Renaissance artworks we have already explored. It offers a potential origin point for the persistent motif of shields in the sky that we see across centuries of European art. The fiery shields reported over the Frankish castle of Sigeberg, the disc-shaped objects in the tapestry of the Summer's Triumph interpreted as heraldic shields, even the description of the object in the Madonna with Saint Giovannino, all of these could be part of a long cultural chain reaction. The idea of a celestial shield was embedded in the Western psyche by the powerful and enduring Roman myth. When people in later centuries witnessed unexplained disc-shaped objects, their minds, steeped in a classical education and religious art, would have immediately reached for that pre-existing symbol. The artists who painted these scenes were not necessarily painting literal shields. They were using the most appropriate symbol from their cultural toolkit to represent something inexplicable. The Ancilia myth, therefore, might be more than just a quaint story. It could be one of the earliest and most influential records of a crashed unknown object, a foundational event that shaped how an entire civilization would perceive and artistically document mysterious aerial phenomena for the next 2 millennia. It suggests that the flying saucer was present in our collective imagination long before the modern era, not as a spaceship but as the sacred shield of a god, falling from a heaven we are only beginning to understand. But of all the ancient texts that have inspired artists to reach for a visual language beyond their time, none is more challenging or more visually spectacular than the prophecy of Ezekiel. Found in the Old Testament, the first chapter describes the prophet's overwhelming vision of divine glory. He speaks of a great storm cloud approaching from the north, flashing with lightning and enveloped in brilliant fire. From within this maelstrom, he sees 4 living creatures, each with 4 faces and 4 wings, moving together in perfect unison. But it is what accompanies these creatures that has captivated and confounded illustrators for over 1,000 years. Ezekiel describes wheels upon the earth, one beside each creature. Their appearance, he says, was like the gleaming of beryl, a precious stone, and their construction was such that there was a wheel within a wheel. The rims of these wheels were immense and terrifying, full of eyes all around. And most mystifying of all, the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When they moved, the wheels moved beside them, and when they rose from the earth, the wheels rose with them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. This is a description of a composite, intelligent, living machine, a vision of such complexity that artists across the centuries have struggled to render it, often producing images that look less like heavenly chariots and more like detailed blueprints for advanced technology. One of the earliest surviving attempts to capture this vision is found in the illuminated pages of the Codex Amiatinus, created in 8th century Northumbria. In this medieval manuscript, the illustrator does not shy away from the bizarre mechanics of the description. The wheels are depicted as interlocking golden hoops set at right angles to one another, literally forming a wheel within a wheel. They are covered in what appear to be studs or jewels, perhaps representing the countless eyes Ezekiel described. The 4 living creatures are integrated directly into this complex structure, their wings touching, creating a single, unified, and formidable entity. The overall impression is not of a symbolic cart but of a precise, engineered device. The medieval artist, working with a limited technological vocabulary, nonetheless succeeded in conveying the intricate, interlocking nature of the wheels, resulting in an image that feels both ancient and strangely modern in its geometric complexity. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, artists approached the vision with a new desire for realism and dynamism. In a stunning 16th-century fresco in the old Cathedral of Salamanca, Spain, the artist depicts Ezekiel's wheel as a vortex of divine power. The wheel within a wheel is rendered as a series of concentric golden rings, spinning with incredible energy. The 4 living creatures are shown in a dramatic, dynamic pose, their multiple faces looking in every direction, their wings beating as if in flight. This interpretation leans into the motion and power of the vision, translating the biblical account into a scene of explosive, celestial force. Yet, even here, the structure of the wheel is meticulously detailed, its layered rings suggesting a sophisticated mechanism rather than a simple wooden chariot wheel. The artist seems to be grappling with the idea of a vehicle that is both alive and mechanical, a concept that pushes the boundaries of Renaissance artistic conventions. Perhaps the most famous and influential artistic interpretation comes from the great French illustrator Gustave Doré in the 19th century. Doré, known for his incredibly detailed and dramatic engravings of biblical scenes, created an image of Ezekiel's vision that has become iconic. In his work, the four creatures are colossal, winged beings, their forms powerful and anthropomorphic, but the wheels are the true centerpiece. Doré depicts them as two massive, interlocked rings, covered in intricate patterns and what can only be described as viewing ports or illuminated panels. The eyes around the rims are rendered as a series of dark, circular openings, giving the wheels a distinctly functional, almost observational quality. They look less like parts of a divine aura and more like the components of a colossal, celestial rover or a piece of exploratory machinery. Doré's immense skill and attention to detail lend a tangible reality to the vision that is both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling, as if he is providing a technical drawing of a vehicle witnessed by the prophet. When we place these artistic interpretations side by side, a remarkable pattern emerges. From the golden interlocking hoops of the Codex Amiatinus to the energetic vortex in Salamanca and the mechanistic engravings of Doré, artists repeatedly arrive at a similar visual conclusion. Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel is depicted as a complex, multi-layered, and often rotational structure. This consistent artistic intuition is precisely what fuels the modern interpretation of the vision as a potential UFO encounter. The phrase "wheel within a wheel" perfectly describes the gyroscopic nature of a modern flying saucer, where an outer ring might rotate around a stable central cabin. The gleaming, beryl-like appearance corresponds to a metallic or crystalline hull reflecting light. The eyes all around the rim could be interpreted as portholes, viewing screens, or even complex sensor arrays scanning the environment. And the most baffling aspect of the vision, that the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels, allowing them to move in perfect unison without turning, suggests a form of intelligent, integrated guidance system, a unified control that allows a complex vehicle to maneuver with impossible agility. This is not to dismiss the profound theological significance of the vision, which for millennia has been understood as a powerful metaphor for God's omnipresence, omniscience, and sovereign mobility. The four faces of the creatures represent the totality of creation. The wheels signify God's providence moving throughout the world, and the eyes symbolize his all-seeing knowledge. This symbolic reading is rich, deeply rooted, and entirely valid. Yet the persistent, almost stubbornly mechanical way in which artists have felt compelled to depict the vision suggests another layer of meaning. It is as if the sheer strangeness of Ezekiel's description forces the artist's hand, pushing them beyond pure symbolism and toward a form of representational realism. They are not just painting an idea, they are trying to paint a thing that the prophet described in the only terms available to him, a vocabulary of wheels, creatures, and eyes, because he had no words for gyroscopes, biomechanical drones, or anti-gravity propulsion. The enduring mystery of Ezekiel's wheels in art is that they stand as a collective, centuries-long effort to visualize the unvisualizable, leaving us with a gallery of images that look less like the heaven of our hymns and more like the spec sheets for vehicles we are only now beginning to imagine. And now we reach the final and perhaps most profound piece in our collection, an artifact that takes us back to the very dawn of the Bronze Age, long before the brushes of Renaissance masters or the pens of medieval monks. This is the sky disk of Nebra, and it is not a painting on canvas or a fresco on a wall, but a physical object, a bronze disk about the size of a small plate, inlaid with golden symbols that seem to capture the very essence of the ancient sky. Discovered by treasure hunters in 1999 near the German town of Nebra, it was dramatically rescued from the black market in a police sting operation, and it has since been authenticated as the oldest known realistic representation of the cosmos anywhere in the world, dating to an astonishing 1600 years before the Common Era. Holding this disc is like holding a window into the mind of a people who lived over 3,600 years ago, a people who looked up at the night sky and felt compelled to make a permanent record of what they saw, forging their understanding of the universe in bronze and gold. The disc itself is a masterpiece of early artistry and astronomy. On a background of a deep blue-green patinated bronze, 32 golden dots are arranged. 7 are clustered tightly together, a formation that experts have convincingly identified as the Pleiades star cluster, a prominent and culturally significant group of stars known to ancient cultures across the globe. A large, circular golden orb and a crescent moon, also in gold, dominate the scene, but it is the 2 golden arcs along the edges that add a layer of incredible sophistication. These arcs precisely match the range of the sun, setting positions between the winter and summer solstices, as seen from the Mittelberg Hill where the disk was found. This means the disk was not just a pretty picture, it was a sophisticated astronomical instrument, a calendar that could be used to synchronize the lunar and solar years, telling its Bronze Age users precisely when to plant and when to harvest. Later, a 3rd arc was added to the bottom, often interpreted as a sun boat, a mythological vessel believed to carry the sun across the ocean of the night, completing its journey from sunset to sunrise. Yet, for all its clear astronomical function, the sky disk of Nebra holds a visual mystery that invites a more speculative interpretation. Look at the arrangement of the 7 Pleiades stars. They are not scattered randomly but form a tight, distinct cluster. Now look at the large circular sun. Its placement relative to the crescent moon is specific and deliberate. Some researchers, looking at this configuration with a different perspective, have proposed that the disk might not only be a map of the sky, but also a record of a singular, extraordinary celestial event. Computer models have shown that around the time the disk was created, a unique astronomical convergence occurred, a solar eclipse where the new moon would have appeared as a crescent right next to the obscured sun, with the Pleiades cluster positioned dramatically close to both. For a prehistoric society, witnessing the sun being seemingly swallowed by the moon, with the 7 sister stars glowing ominously nearby, would have been a terrifying and world-altering event, one so significant they would have felt compelled to immortalize it in precious metal. This leads us to the most provocative theory of all. If the disk records a specific, traumatic celestial event, could the golden arcs represent more than just solstitial markers? The arc along the bottom, the so-called sun boat, is particularly intriguing. Its shape is not that of a simple rainbow. It is a curved, stylized form with multiple strokes, suggesting movement or perhaps even multiple components. To a modern eye, this arc, combined with the central orbs, can appear hauntingly similar to a classic UFO depiction, a central, circular command deck with a sweeping, curved hull beneath it. Could the artisans of the Unetis culture, the people who created this disk, have witnessed something more than an eclipse? Imagine a scenario where a brilliant, unidentified object appeared in the sky during this already frightening eclipse. The witnesses, having no vocabulary for spacecraft or advanced technology, would have described it using the only terms they had. It might have been a fiery shield, a golden boat, or a celestial chariot. The artist, tasked with creating a sacred object to commemorate the omen, would have then blended the real astronomical observations, the sun, moon, and stars, with the inexplicable object, rendering it as a majestic, arcing vessel sailing across the cosmic sea. In this interpretation, the sky disk of Nebra becomes perhaps humanity's very first painting of an unidentified flying object, a story of first contact encoded in gold and bronze and buried for millennia on a dark forest hill. It stands as the ultimate bookend to our journey, a powerful reminder that our obsession with the mysteries of the sky is not a modern phenomenon, but a fundamental part of the human story, stretching back to the very moment we first learned to shape metal and our own destiny. So as we stand back from this extraordinary gallery of 25 ancient artworks, a remarkable pattern begins to emerge from the chaos of centuries and cultures. It's no longer just about individual paintings, it's about a collection of visual echoes that reverberate across time. Certain motifs appear again and again with a persistence that defies mere coincidence. The most dominant of these is, without a doubt, the disc shape. We see it in the hovering object behind the Madonna in Florence, in the golden mandorla of Botticini's Assumption, and in the fiery shields over the Frankish castle. This isn't a form limited to one artist's imagination or one region's artistic style. From the silk paintings of Japan to the frescoes of Serbia, the disc is a universal constant. Equally persistent is the theme of radiating light. This isn't the soft, ambient glow of a heavenly aura. It's often depicted as a focused, direct beam, a tangible energy. Look at the laser-like ray striking Mary in Crivelli's Annunciation, the four powerful beams from de Gelder's disc at the baptism, or the sharp light emanating from the object in the Madonna with Saint Giovannino. This light is active and purposeful, not passive and decorative. Then we have the cylindrical or cigar-shaped forms, from the mysterious object in the sky of the Mariazell Basilica to the airship-like sketch in Matthew Paris's Chronicle. And finally, we cannot ignore the consistent presence of occupants, the pilot figures in the Decani frescoes, the beautiful woman in the Japanese Atsuro Bune, the humanoid forms associated with Ezekiel's wheels. These are not random artistic choices, they are the building blocks of a mystery that spans the globe. When we see the same visual language appearing in a 14th century Serbian monastery, a 15th century Italian church, and a 17th century Japanese scroll, we are forced to confront a fundamental question. Are we looking at evidence of a shared human experience, a collective witnessing of similar unexplained aerial phenomena across different eras? Or are we simply seeing the transmission of artistic and religious symbols? The mainstream art historical perspective offers a powerful and coherent explanation. In this view, these shapes are not literal objects but powerful symbols. The disc is a near-universal representation of the cosmos, the sun, or divine perfection, a perfect, unbroken circle symbolizing eternity and heavenly power. Radiating light is the ultimate symbol of divine revelation, of God's glory breaking into the human world. The cylinder or cigar shape could be a symbolic bridge between heaven and earth, a pathway for the divine. And the humanoid figures are angels, gods, or spiritual intermediaries. These symbols were part of a shared cultural vocabulary that was transmitted along trade routes, through religious texts, and by traveling artists. A monk in Kosovo and a painter in Florence, though separated by vast distances, were both part of the broader Christian tradition with its standardized iconography. They were using this common symbolic toolkit to represent complex theological ideas, not to document physical events. According to this view, the consistency we see is not the consistency of observation, but the consistency of symbolism. Yet, the alternative interpretation presents a compelling counter-argument. What if the consistency stems from the consistency of the phenomenon itself? Imagine that people in ancient Japan, medieval Europe, and Renaissance Italy were all, independently, witnessing similar classes of unidentified aerial objects. They would all naturally describe what they saw using the most familiar objects from their own world. To a European knight, a silvery disc might look like a shield. To a Japanese fisherman, a curved vessel might resemble an inverted rice bowl or a Xhosa hat. To a biblical prophet, a complex machine might be described as a wheel within a wheel full of eyes. The radiating light beams are one of the most difficult elements to explain away as pure symbolism. While light is a common metaphor for divine grace, the specific depiction of straight, targeted beams like searchlights is anomalously technological in a world that should only be painting soft, ethereal glows. This suggests that at least some artists may have been painting what they or their patrons actually witnessed, a physical phenomenon emitting directed energy and then contextualizing it within their religious framework. The woman in the Atsuro Bune legend isn't a symbolic angel. she is a specific, described being with clothing, behavior, and a mysterious box, details that feel more like a factual report than a theological allegory. The sheer diversity of cultures reporting these similar motifs, many of whom had no contact with each other, weakens the argument that this is purely a case of transmitted symbolism. It points toward the tantalizing possibility that our sky has always been active and our ancestors were its faithful, if bewildered, chroniclers. This leaves us not with a single answer but with a profound and beautiful duality. Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing one explanation over the other, but in understanding how they are inextricably linked. The human brain is a pattern-making machine, and when confronted with the utterly inexplicable, it reaches for the nearest familiar concept to make sense of it. A brilliant, silent disk hovering in the night sky would be processed by a medieval monk as a divine shield or a heavenly chariot because that was the only conceptual box he had to put it in. The artist, then, is not just a blind copyist of symbols, he is an interpreter of reality. He takes a potentially real, witnessed event and filters it through the cultural and religious lens of his time. He translates the unexplainable into the symbolic. This fusion of observation and interpretation is what gives these artworks their enduring power. They are simultaneously potential documents of high strangeness and profound works of spiritual art. They don't force us to decide between God and a UFO. They suggest that in the minds of our ancestors, the line between the divine and the technological may have been far blurrier than it is for us today. These common themes, the discs, the lights, the cylinders, the figures, are therefore a bridge. They connect us to our past not through a single, simple truth, but through a continuous, multi-layered conversation between what was seen in the sky and what was believed in the heart, a conversation painted in light and shadow on the walls of our shared history. Of course, for every compelling mystery, there exists an equally compelling counter-argument grounded in reason, history, and science. To present a complete picture, it's crucial that we step back and examine the mainstream explanations offered by art historians, theologians, and scientists. These perspectives provide a sober, well-researched framework that often demystifies the seemingly anomalous, grounding these fantastical images in the cultural and environmental realities of their time. One of the most powerful and all-encompassing explanations lies in the rich language of religious symbolism. In the world of medieval and Renaissance art, nothing was ever just what it appeared to be. Every color, every object, every gesture was part of a sophisticated visual code designed to convey complex theological ideas to a largely illiterate population. The golden discs and radiant mandalas we see, for instance, are classic examples of halos and aureoles used to denote divinity, sanctity, and the celestial realm. In Carlo Crivelli's Annunciation, the intricate golden cloud emitting a single beam is a masterful representation of the Holy Trinity channeling the Holy Spirit, symbolized by the dove toward Mary. It's not a UFO projecting a laser, but a meticulously constructed theological diagram of the Immaculate Conception. Similarly, the strange object in Bonaventura Salimbeni's Glorification of the Eucharist is a textbook Sphaera Mundi, a symbolic representation of the entire cosmos under God's dominion. Its mechanical appearance possibly influenced by the burgeoning scientific curiosity of the early 17th century, which viewed the universe as a divine clockwork mechanism. Beyond specific symbols, artists frequently turn to established iconography to represent abstract concepts. The personifications of the sun and the moon flanking Christ in the Decoding monastery fresco are a standard feature of crucifixion scenes, meant to signify the cosmic scale of the event. The fiery shields reported in chronicles could easily be symbolic representations of divine protection, a metaphor that would be instantly understood by contemporary viewers. When we look at Marcellino da Panicale's Miracle of the Snow, the strange lenticular cloud forms are not a fleet of spacecraft, but a highly stylized Renaissance interpretation of the miraculous clouds through which God delivered the summer snow. The artist wasn't documenting a sighting. He was using the artistic conventions of his day to visualize a miracle, much like a modern graphic designer might use a stock image to represent an idea. In this view, the consistent appearance of discs and lights across different artworks isn't evidence of a global phenomenon, but proof of a shared symbolic language that was transmitted across Europe through religious texts, traveling artists, and the powerful unifying force of the church. Moving from the sanctuary to the sky itself, many of these enigmatic sightings can be elegantly explained by dramatic but entirely natural atmospheric and astronomical events. Our ancestors lived in a world without electric lights, where the night sky was a brilliant, ever-changing canvas. They lacked the scientific vocabulary we have today, so when they witnessed something extraordinary, they interpreted it through the lens of omens, angels, and divine wrath. The chaotic, fiery battle witnessed over Nuremberg in 1561, for example, bears a startling resemblance to a complex parhelion or sundial. This occurs when sunlight refracts through ice crystals in the atmosphere, creating bright spots, arcs, and even phantom suns that can appear to move and shift in a way that looks like a celestial conflict. Similarly, the massive, dark, mushroom cloud-like form in the Lollards Tower mural could be the anvil top of a powerful cumulonimbus cloud, a sight that would have been interpreted as a terrifying omen of divine displeasure. Bright comets with long, sweeping tails were particularly potent symbols of change and disaster, and their appearance was meticulously recorded in chronicles and art. A slow-moving fireball meteor, fragmenting as it enters the atmosphere, could easily be described as a fleet of burning shields or a chariot of fire. Even the quiet, dark disk in Lucas Cranach's Judgment of Paris could be a simple depiction of a particularly well-defined lenticular cloud, a natural formation so perfectly saucer-shaped that it continues to be mistaken for a UFO by people today. Finally, we must consider the human element, the role of artistic license, misinterpretation, and the projection of our own modern biases onto the past. Artists were not cameras, they were creative individuals with unique styles and motivations. Giotto, in his quest for emotional realism in the Scrovegni Chapel, might have painted a highly stylized moon with a light trail to convey the spiritual turmoil of the arrest of Christ, not a hovering saucer. The sketch of a cigar-shaped object next to a church in Matthew Paris's Chronicle could very well be a stylized processional banner, its details lost to time and the limitations of medieval illustration. Perhaps the most significant factor is our own modern perspective. We are children of the space age, steeped in imagery of flying saucers and interstellar travel. When we look at an ancient painting, we unconsciously filter it through this modern lens, seeing a UFO where the original audience saw a symbol of God's glory. This is a form of pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon of seeing familiar patterns, like faces in clouds, in random stimuli. We are actively looking for UFOs, and so we find them, often ignoring the clear and well-documented cultural context that would have made the image perfectly understandable to its contemporary viewers. In the end, these skeptical perspectives don't diminish the wonder of these artworks, they enrich it. They remind us that our ancestors were brilliant storytellers and symbol makers, using their skills not to document visitors from other worlds, but to explore the deepest mysteries of their own faith, the cosmos, and the human place within it. We have now traveled through centuries and crossed continents, from the domed churches of medieval Serbia to the silk scrolls of Edo period Japan, from the battlefields of the Renaissance to the sacred walls of the Vatican. We have stood before 25 windows into the past, each one offering a glimpse of something extraordinary hovering in the skies that our ancestors painted. This journey has not been about finding a single, definitive answer, but about exploring a profound and persistent mystery woven into the very fabric of our shared history. We have seen the discs, the cylinders, the beams of focused light, and the enigmatic figures, all rendered with a consistency that spans disparate cultures and eras. Whether we view these artworks through the lens of faith, interpreting them as powerful religious symbols of divine chariots and heavenly hosts, or through the lens of speculation, seeing them as potential records of unexplained aerial phenomena, one thing is undeniable. Our forebears were looking up at the same vast, mysterious sky that we do today, and they felt compelled to record what saw with the tools they had available. The true power of this collection lies not in proving extraterrestrial visitation, but in demonstrating the timeless human drive to make sense of the unknown. These artists, whether guided by divine inspiration, symbolic tradition, or direct observation, have left us a gallery of questions. They challenge our modern arrogance, reminding us that the phenomenon of unexplained aerial objects is not a product of the 20th century, but a thread that runs deep through the tapestry of human experience. The evidence, as it were, is not locked away in a government vault, but has been hanging in plain sight in the world's great museums and churches for hundreds of years, waiting for us to simply look up and wonder. So now we turn this profound question over to you. After seeing this incredible parade of art and absorbing the many interpretations from the symbolic to the scientific to the speculative, what do you believe? When you look at the pilot in the Decoding fresco, or the man shielding his eyes in Florence, or the intricate mechanical wheel within a wheel from Ezekiel's vision, what is your conclusion? Do you see the hand of God, the brush of a symbolic storyteller, or the careful documentation of a witness to something truly beyond their understanding? We would love to hear your perspective. Tell us in the comments below which of these 25 ancient paintings you find the most compelling, and what you think these artists were truly witnessing. And if you enjoyed this journey to the edges of history and mystery, be sure to subscribe. We have many more explorations into the world's greatest enigmas.